The rain had been falling for hours that night, tapping softly against the cracked window of the tiny room where Amina sat alone. The world outside looked blurred and distant, as if the rain itself was trying to hide her pain from the world. She sat quietly on the floor, her back against the cold wall, her knees pulled close to her chest. Tears rolled down her cheeks silently, disappearing into the sleeves of her old sweater. No one heard her cries. No one ever did. For years, her tears had fallen in silence, unnoticed by the people who walked past her every day without truly seeing her. Amina had always been a quiet girl. From childhood, she learned that speaking up often led to disappointment. Her family was poor, living in a crowded neighborhood where dreams were often crushed by the heavy weight of survival. Her father worked long hours but rarely spoke with kindness, and her mother carried the exhaustion of life on her shoulders like a permanent shadow. Love existed in the house, but it was buried beneath worry, frustration, and endless struggle. At school, Amina tried her best to disappear. She kept her head down, finished her work quietly, and avoided attention. But silence sometimes attracts cruelty. A few classmates noticed how shy she was and decided she was an easy target. They mocked her worn clothes, her quiet voice, and the way she always seemed lost in thought. Their laughter followed her through hallways like echoes she could never escape. Every evening, she walked home alone, carrying not just her books but the heavy weight of humiliation. Once inside her small room, she would sit on the floor and cry quietly so no one would hear. Those were the silent tears that marked the beginning of her story. Each tear carried a piece of pain, a piece of doubt, and a piece of the belief that she was invisible. Years passed, and life did not become easier. After finishing school, Amina dreamed of studying further, but money was scarce. Her parents needed her to work and help support the family. So she found a job in a small clothing factory. The days were long and exhausting. The machines roared loudly, drowning out conversations, and the air smelled of fabric dust and sweat. Workers sat shoulder to shoulder, stitching clothes that would be sold in expensive stores they could never afford to enter. Amina rarely spoke during work. She simply stitched, hour after hour, lost in her thoughts. Her coworkers sometimes joked and laughed, but she stayed quiet, as if the world had already decided her role was to observe rather than participate. Yet deep inside her heart, something small but powerful lived. It was a spark of hope, faint but stubborn. Every night after returning home, when everyone else slept, Amina opened an old notebook she had kept since school. In it, she wrote her thoughts, dreams, and ideas. She wrote about the life she wished she could live. She wrote about courage, strength, and the possibility that one day things might change. At first, those words felt like fragile fantasies. But writing gave her something she had never truly felt before, a voice. One night, while writing by the dim light of a flickering bulb, Amina paused. She read the words she had written: "Your tears are not weakness. They are proof that your heart is still alive." For the first time in years, she looked at herself in the small cracked mirror on the wall. Her eyes were tired, but they held a quiet determination she had never noticed before. That moment became the turning point of her life. The next morning, when she walked to work, something inside her felt slightly different. The world looked the same crowded streets, the same gray buildings, but she walked with a small sense of awareness she had never felt before. She began to observe people more closely. She noticed that many of them carried pain too. The tired shopkeeper rubbing his eyes. The young boy selling fruit on the roadside. The woman rushing to work with worry on her face. Everyone had their silent battles. For the first time, Amina realized she was not alone in suffering. That realization planted a seed of courage inside her. Weeks later, the factory supervisor shouted angrily at one of the workers for making a small mistake. The girl looked terrified, her hands shaking as she apologized again and again. The entire room fell silent. No one dared speak. But something unexpected happened. Amina stood up. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, and her voice trembled, but she spoke. "It was an accident," she said quietly. "She has been working since morning without a break." The supervisor looked shocked. No one had ever challenged him before. The room froze as everyone waited for his reaction. For a moment, Amina thought she might lose her job. But instead, the supervisor simply frowned and walked away without another word. The room slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the workers kept glancing at Amina with surprise. For them, it was a small moment. For Amina, it was the first time she had ever defended someone. That night, as she wrote in her notebook again, she realized something incredible: courage did not arrive as a thunderstorm. It arrived quietly, like a whisper telling her she deserved to stand. Days turned into months, and Amina slowly changed. She still worked hard at the factory, but she no longer saw herself as invisible. She began helping coworkers with their tasks and encouraging them when they felt discouraged. One day, a friend at the factory suggested she share her writings online. At first, the idea terrified her. The thought of strangers reading her words made her heart race. But after weeks of hesitation, she finally gathered the courage to post one short message on a social media page. It was simple: sometimes the strongest people are the ones who cry in silence and still wake up the next day ready to fight again. She did not expect anyone to notice. But people did. Within hours, comments began appearing. Strangers wrote that her words described their own struggles. Some said her message gave them hope. Others thanked her for expressing feelings they could never put into words. Amina stared at the screen in disbelief. For years, she believed her voice did not matter. Now people across the world were listening. Encouraged by the response, she began posting more of her thoughts and stories. Her messages were honest, emotional, and deeply human. She wrote about pain, resilience, kindness, and the quiet strength hidden inside ordinary people. Slowly, her audience grew. Thousands of people began following her words. What made her different was her authenticity. She did not pretend to be perfect or powerful. She simply shared her journey from silent tears toward courage. Months later, a small organization invited her to speak at a local event about overcoming hardship. When she received the invitation, she almost deleted the email. The idea of speaking in front of people terrified her more than anything. But she remembered the girl at the factory she had defended. She remembered the strangers who found hope in her words. And she said yes. The day of the event, her hands trembled as she stepped onto the stage. The room was filled with people waiting to hear her story. For a moment, fear threatened to silence her again. But then she began speaking. She spoke about her childhood, her struggles, the nights she cried alone, and the quiet moment when she decided to believe in herself. The audience listened in complete silence. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded as if they understood every word. When she finished, the room erupted into applause that echoed through the hall. Amina stood there in disbelief. For years, she believed she was invisible. Now her voice was reaching hearts everywhere. That moment marked the transformation of her life. The girl who once cried in silence had become a symbol of quiet strength. Her journey continued to grow. She began writing longer stories and motivational speeches that inspired thousands of people facing their own struggles. Her words traveled across cities, countries, and cultures. People began calling her story, from silent tears to unstoppable power. But Amina knew the truth behind that title. Power was not something she suddenly discovered. It had always been inside her, hidden beneath fear and doubt. The tears she once tried to hide were not signs of weakness. They were the beginning of her transformation. Years later, when she walked past the same cracked mirror in her old room, she smiled at the reflection staring back at her. She was still the same girl. Still humble. Still human. But now she carried something far stronger than pain. She carried purpose. And every step she took reminded the world of a powerful truth. Sometimes the quietest souls hold the greatest strength, and the tears that fall in silence can one day rise into unstoppable power.